Ever seen a man fight for his last breath while his feet are still touching the ground? No neck snap. No quick end. Just the slow, grinding sound of air refusing to enter lungs, and a crowd standing by as if they were watching a common farm chore. That was justice in the Arizona Territory, 1868. It wasn't about law. It wasn't about fairness. It was about making a message so brutal that it stayed in your nightmares forever. Today we look at the raw, unfiltered reality of the Wild West, where the line between a courtroom and a graveyard didn't exist, and where the desert sun was the final judge. Imagine walking through a frontier town in 1868. You expect to hear the clatter of horses or the distant sound of a hammer. Instead, you hear a wet, rhythmic scraping, a sound that makes your skin crawl. You look toward the edge of town, near a crooked cottonwood tree. A man is hanging there, but his boots are resting flat on the dusty earth. His knees are bent. His chest is heaving. Every time he tries to stand fully, the rope cuts into his throat. He isn't dying quickly. He is choking a little at a time, hour by hour. This was half-hanging. It wasn't a mistake by the executioner, it was a deliberate, cold-blooded choice. A fast hanging ended the problem, but a slow one provided a warning that burned itself into the memory of every person who saw it. Texas and Kansas papers from that era reported that crowds would gather at dawn. They didn't come to look away in horror. Some brought lunch. They treated it like a public performance, waiting to see how long the accused could fight before his legs finally gave out. One witness from a Kansas town described the scene with chilling precision. The man fought for breath until the dust turned to mud on his face from his own sweat and tears. The pain was raw, unfiltered, and endless. There was no blackout, no release. Just the terror of being suspended between life and death, staring at the ground you weren't allowed to walk on anymore. Why did they do it this way? Why choose the most agonizing path? In a land where law was thin and fleeting, violence became the only currency that everyone understood. If you were a horse thief, a murderer, or even just a drifter who rubbed the wrong rancher the wrong way, the mob wanted you to suffer. They wanted you to be an example. When the town lawman stood by with a cigarette dangling from his lip, it told the world that the rules had changed. The frontier didn't care about the rights of the accused, it only cared about the fear of the guilty. As you watch that man struggle, you realize that the rope isn't just a tool of death. It is a tool of control. The tension in his neck mirrors the tension in the entire town. Nobody breathes easy. Nobody speaks up. Even the birds seem to go quiet, waiting for the final snap that never comes as quickly as it should. This was the dark heartbeat of Arizona in the 1860s, a place where life was cheap, and the cost of crossing the wrong people was measured in agonizing, slow-motion silence. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. The desert is not just sand and heat. It is a hunger that never stops. Think about it, a man forced to walk for miles with iron cuffs biting into his wrists. These were not just shackles. They were weight, they were torture, and they were a permanent mark of a life gone wrong. The chains were heavy, cold, and cruel. They pulled at the skin every time a man stumbled. And in the Arizona sun, the metal grew hot enough to sear right through the bone. Why go this far? Why force a man to walk until his feet were nothing but raw, bleeding pulp? The sheriffs wanted to break the spirit, not just the body. A man in a cell could dream of escape, but a man on a chain drive had no dreams left. He had only the horizon. The endless, mocking horizon that never seemed to get any closer. Look at the record of 1887. 5 men tied together at the wrists, stumbling over sharp rock and dry brush. Their lips were cracked and bleeding. Their eyes were sunken, staring at nothing but the dirt beneath their feet. They were not walking for justice. They were walking because someone wanted to see if they could survive the furnace of the desert. Some fell. And when they fell, they didn't get help. They were dragged. The rope tight against their neck, the sound of boots scraping over stone echoing through the silence of the valley. Could a person even endure such a thing? The records say yes, for a while. But after the second day, humanity starts to slip away. You see men begging for water, crawling toward a dry barrel, only to find it filled with nothing but dust and lies. The guards did not care. They watched from their horses, safe and hydrated, while the prisoners turned into ghosts before they even stopped breathing. It was a slow, agonizing erasure of a human soul. Every step was a battle against the heat. Every clink of the iron chain was a countdown to the end. Some men came back, if you can call it living. They returned with scars that went deeper than the rope burns on their ankles. They were hollowed out. The desert had taken everything that made them human, leaving behind only the shell of a man who had seen the worst of what his own kind could do. And yet the towns watched. They stood on the porches of their saloons, drinks in hand, watching the chain drives pass by as if it were a parade. How could they stand it? How could they watch a man wither away and call it law? You might think that after the chains, the cruelty would have a limit. But you would be wrong. The frontier was a place where silence was the most dangerous thing of all. Imagine being one of those 5 men on a chain drive. You have been walking for days. Your throat is a desert of its own, parched and screaming for just a single drop of water. You look at the man shackled next to you. His eyes are rolled back. His head is lolling on his chest. Is he still alive? You don't even know. You just keep walking because if you stop, you fall, and if you fall, you might never get back up. There was no mercy in the dust. The law didn't care if you were a hardened criminal or a man who simply wandered onto the wrong property. The punishment was the journey itself. The guards didn't need to use whips. They didn't need to use guns. They just needed the sun. They let the relentless, white-hot Arizona heat do the dirty work for them. It was a slow-motion execution that didn't leave a body for a coroner to find. Just bones scattered across the plains for the coyotes to pick over later. What happens to a man when he realizes that no one is coming to save him? When he looks around and sees nothing but endless, burning sand. The mind starts to fracture. You begin to hear voices in the wind. You see water in the shimmering heat waves, only to reach out and find nothing but dry, cracked earth. It is a terrifying descent into madness. You start to wonder if you ever had a home or a name or a life before the iron cuffs. Everything fades away into the singular, burning desire to just stop walking. The people in the towns were no better. They saw these men pass through their streets, ghosts in rags dragging their chains, and they looked away. They went back to their card games and their whiskey. They acted as if it were a common, everyday event, like a storm rolling in or the seasons changing. This normalization of agony is what haunts history. How did the human heart become so cold? It wasn't just the lawmen, it was the neighbors, the shopkeepers, the families. They stood there, silent, while a man's life was squeezed out of him by the sheer weight of his own existence. This wasn't just about punishment. It was about erasure. They wanted to strip away everything that made these men individuals. They wanted them to be nothing more than beasts of burden, shuffling toward a grave they were forced to dig with their own feet. And as they walked, the desert kept its secrets. The sand covered the tracks. The sun bleached the memory. And by the time they reached the end of the line, the world had already forgotten they ever existed. Survival. It is the most primal instinct, yet in the Wild West, it was often the most expensive commodity. You look at those stories of the chain drives, the men barely standing, and you have to ask, what kept them going? Was it hope? Or was it just the sheer, terrifying fear of what would happen if they quit? Some men lived through it, but they were never the same. They walked into the desert as men and crawled out as something else entirely. Something broken. When a man finally collapsed, the reality hit with the force of a hammer. There was no water bucket waiting. There was no doctor to bandage the shredded skin on their ankles. Instead, there was the indifference of the frontier. If you couldn't keep up, you were a liability. And in 1868, liabilities were discarded like trash. The guards would often leave a man to the mercy of the elements. Imagine lying there, face down in the dirt, the sun beating down on your back, listening to the fading sound of the others walking away. It is the ultimate loneliness. The world shrinks down to the sound of your own heartbeat and the slow, inevitable approach of the end. But the trauma didn't stop when they reached a jail. Oh no, that was just the beginning. The confinement was another kind of hell. They were shoved into cells that were little more than wooden boxes. Dark, cramped, and smelling of rot. You couldn't sit. You couldn't stretch. You were trapped in a space that barely held your frame. How long can a human mind stay intact when it is deprived of light, movement, and dignity? The records are filled with stories of men who entered these cells speaking their own names and exited speaking to shadows. The silence of those prisons was deafening. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of a tomb. You could hear the scratching of rats in the walls. You could hear the muffled voices of people outside living their lives, completely unaware that just a few feet away, a soul was unraveling in the dark. It makes you think about the nature of justice, doesn't it? If the punishment is so severe that it destroys the person, does it even serve a purpose? Or is the destruction the whole point? It feels like the goal wasn't to correct a mistake, but to satisfy a hunger for vengeance that lived in the heart of the mob. They didn't want justice. They wanted blood. They wanted to see someone pay a price so high that no one would ever dare to cross them again. And in that, they succeeded. They built a legacy of terror that outlasted the towns themselves. How does a society reach a point where they watch a man wither away and call it a job well done? That is the real mystery of the frontier. It wasn't just the lawmen who were twisted. It was everyone. The blacksmith, the store owner, the mother walking her child down the dusty main street. They all stood by. They watched the chains. They heard the screams. And they did nothing. This wasn't an accident. This was a culture. They had turned cruelty into a spectator sport. Think about that. You are in a town in Arizona. It is a hot Tuesday afternoon. You are standing in line for supplies. You look across the street and see a man collapsed in the dirt, his skin blistered and raw from the shackles. You look at him, then you look back at your shopping list. You don't feel a surge of anger. You don't feel a need to help. You just feel nothing. You carry on with your day as if that man is just another piece of scenery, like a fence post or a barrel of water. That indifference is more terrifying than the violence itself. It meant that the person suffering had already lost their status as a human being. They were a problem to be solved, a nuisance to be removed. When a community collectively decides that a person is no longer human, there is no limit to what they can do to them. They could justify any horror, any level of agony, all in the name of order. And why? Was it safety? Did they truly believe that these brutal displays kept the town safe? Or was it just an outlet for their own frustrations? Life on the frontier was hard. It was grueling, lonely, and often thankless. Perhaps, when they saw someone else suffering, it made them feel a little more powerful. It gave them a sense of control in a land that was fundamentally out of their control. They couldn't tame the desert, so they tamed the man. They couldn't stop the storms, so they stopped the thief. But the cost of this so-called order was the very soul of the town. You can see it in the way the stories were told years later. They didn't talk about the guilt. They didn't talk about the horror. They talked about it as if it were a simple, necessary chore. It is chilling. To lose your empathy so completely that you can look at a man dying in agony and only wonder if the punishment was long enough. That is how the Wild West survived. It lived on the fuel of suppressed conscience and the comfort of the mob. The desert never forgets. That is the truth that every man who walked those trails eventually learned. You can bury the bodies, you can scrub the blood from the floorboards of the jail, and you can tell yourselves that you were doing what had to be done. But the land remembers. The dust that filled the throats of those prisoners is the same dust that settles on the graves of the men who put them there. The cycle of violence doesn't just disappear. It leaves a stain on the earth that time can never wash away. When you look back at these accounts, the half-hangings, the forced marches, the wooden crates, and the crushing heat, you aren't just looking at history. You are looking into the darkest corners of the human heart. You are seeing what happens when fear takes the wheel and mercy is thrown out the window. It is a cautionary tale that we still haven't fully learned. We like to think we are different. We like to think we have evolved. But the capacity for this kind of cruelty is still there, waiting for the right environment, the right spark of fear, to bring it to the surface. What was the final result of all this? Did it stop the crime? Did it bring peace to the frontier? Hardly. It only ensured that the cycle would repeat. The man who survived the chain drive didn't go home and become a model citizen. He went home with a heart full of cold, hard rage. He went home having seen that the world was a place of bottomless cruelty, and he learned to act accordingly. The brutality didn't end the violence. It fed it. It raised a generation that knew only how to take, how to hurt, and how to survive at the expense of everyone else. And now, as we sit in the comfort of a world that has moved on, we have to carry the weight of these stories. We can't just turn the page. We have to sit with the uncomfortable truth that these were not monsters from a fairy tale. They were ordinary people who made a choice to be monstrous. They were neighbors, fathers, and friends who decided that their own peace of mind was worth more than the life of the person in the chains. That is the true legacy of the American West. It was a place where humanity was stripped away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the raw, screaming instinct for self-preservation. The silence that covers the desert now is not empty. It is heavy with the weight of everything that happened there. It is a reminder that we are all capable of being lost in the dark if we let our fear dictate our actions. So, the next time you hear someone talk about the good old days, or the rugged justice of the frontier, remember the man with his feet on the ground and the rope around his neck. Remember the 5 ghosts shuffling through the sand. And ask yourself, what kind of world are we building? Are we building one based on justice, or are we just waiting for the next time the chains begin to rattle? The desert is watching, and it has a very long memory indeed. If you enjoy dark untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.